Let's jump right into a really fascinating historical mystery for this explainer. Think about a piece of text literally everyone knows, Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. We've all read it, right? But here's the wild part. Nobody alive today has actually heard it. There's zero audio of Lincoln. We just have the ink on the page. But what if those words are actually a hidden blueprint? Let's see if we can use the structure itself to hear the speech exactly the way it was meant to be delivered.
7 years ago. You know the line. The ink is totally frozen in history. It's a foundational text for sure. But when you just read it in your head or skim it in a textbook, you completely lose the auditory and emotional experience of being there. We get the literal meaning, yeah, but the incredible emotional impact of that live oratorical delivery, it feels totally lost to time.
So what did it actually sound like? Well, we can actually reverse engineer Lincoln's exact pace, his tone, and his emotional delivery. How? By treating the grammar and punctuation not just as boring language rules, but like musical sheet music. Every single comma, every dash, every repeated word, it's a deliberate instruction. If we look closely, we can literally hear where his voice would drop to a whisper and where it would absolutely boom across that field.
Part 1. Pacing a Nation's Grief, a Solemn Foundation.
To really get the emotional impact here, we have to put ourselves in that deeply somber reality. The audience was standing on a literal, fresh battlefield. Notice the stark contrast Lincoln sets up right out of the gate. He starts with this sweeping, lofty, historical vision, 7 years ago, talking about liberty. But then, boom, he immediately crashes us down into a grim present reality. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. To make that massive shift work, an orator is physically forced into a slow, heavy, super deliberate pace. You literally cannot rush these words if you want them to land.
And that slow, heavy pace drops us into what is arguably the quietest, most solemn emotional valley of the whole speech. Listen to this. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. It's incredibly brief. It's simple. To deliver this effectively, the cadence has to be incredibly soft and deliberate. It's a moment of quiet reverence, honoring the dead, right before the entire energy of the speech completely shifts gears.
Part 2. The power of emphasis, building the rhythm. As we hit the third paragraph, that slow, mournful tone gives way to a building, rhythmic intensity. Look at the punctuation here. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. Those em-dashes, they aren't just grammar. For a public speaker, those are literal pauses. They physically force you to stop, take a breath, and place distinct, heavy emphasis on the very next verb. You have to pause before we cannot consecrate, and pause again before we cannot hallow.
This brilliantly illustrates the famous rule of 3. This is our first major point of emphasis where Lincoln would have seriously stepped up his vocal power. With each word, dedicate, consecrate, hallow, he's physically raising his volume and emotional intensity. The rhythm absolutely demands it. He's building tension, moving from that quiet, standard volume to something that literally rings out across the massive crowd.
Right after this rhythmic buildup, Lincoln executes a total oratorical pivot. The text completely shifts. He says, "It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work." He's no longer just mourning. The emotional delivery transforms from sorrow to sheer determination. He's actively commanding the living to take action.
Part 3. A resolute crescendo, the final push. With this pivot, the pace noticeably accelerates. Look at the structure of this massive final sentence. It's a rapid-fire repetition of that clauses. That from these honored dead, that we here highly resolve, that this nation under God, and that government. This hammering structure is like an engine. It forces the speaker to speed up, linking these ideas with a highly resolute, inspiring tone. You can't stop to take a breath between these clauses. You just have to ride that momentum forward.
And riding that momentum brings us to the second massive point of vocal emphasis. Shall have a new birth of freedom. Coming off those rapid-fire that clauses, this phrase is meant to absolutely ring out. The words new birth demand to be punched vocally. It's the hopeful, powerful core of his entire argument, delivered right before the final climactic sequence.
So, all of this momentum finally lands on what is easily the most famous sequence in American history. The pace becomes rapid, almost staccato, of the people,
By the people. This repetition, shifting just the prepositions, acts like a literal drum beat. The voice naturally accelerates here, pushing the volume and emotion higher and higher to match this incredibly tight structure.
For the people! This is the landing of the final punch.
These three isolated phrases represent the absolute peak emotional impact and the loudest volume of the entire address. The rhythm is perfectly engineered to make this specific concept echo in the ears of the crowd.
And then the conclusion. Shall not perish from the earth. After that soaring, rapid crescendo, the speech ends on an incredibly firm, unyielding note. It brings all of that massive momentum to an abrupt, powerful halt. The finality of the word earth drops like a heavy anchor. It leaves the audience breathless, letting the silence that follows do just as much work as the words themselves.
It's truly amazing how the blueprint of this speech reveals exactly what it sounded like. Just by looking at the dashes and the repetition, we can literally hear Lincoln moving his audience from deep, slow mourning to a thunderous call to action. Which leaves us with a fascinating question to ponder to wrap up this explainer. If a few structural choices can completely dictate the emotion, the volume, and the impact of an audience over a century later, how closely are we really listening to the rhythms of the words we read every day?